So, have you ever been in this kind of situation where you've heard people sing endless amounts of praise for a game, but never really had any sort of interest in picking it up? For some, it's because they don't like leaving their comfort zone. For others, it's because they barely know anything about said game. And for me, it's because said game was attached to a genre I never really cared about. Which is the reason why I stayed away from the game we're talking about, OMORI, for so long. I really only picked it up because I wanted to talk about something for Halloween, in all honesty. And after beating it, I am honestly kicking myself for ignoring such an amazing game for so long. This game achieves so much and exceeded anything I thought was possible. And I am here to gush all about it. Get ready, everyone, for I'm going to talk about why OMORI is a beautiful, horrifying, and above all else, captivating game. Alright, first and foremost, for this pro section, we gotta talk about just how good this art style is. So, while you can guess from the footage, this game was made in RPG Maker. And while most games made from something like that can feel rather on the generic side, the amount of effort that went into pushing it into its absolute limit is absolutely incredible. There's such an impressive level of work put into the backgrounds, character sprites, the color palette. It's very easy to tell just how much focus went into the detail and design of basically everything. But of course, the absolute standout of this game is the character and enemy art, which were all hand-drawn by OMOCAT themselves, showcasing the dedication to their craft. I love that the designs can go from adorable bunnies and tiny sprouts to unholy Elden abominations and mentally traumatized teenagers. And that combo perfectly encapsulates the feeling of Headspace itself, the place where a large majority of the game takes place. And man, is Headspace creepy, which may sound weird given just how cutesy it all is, but that vibe is exactly why it is so unnerving. Everywhere in Headspace is so brightly colored, so adorable, and so peppy that you just feel this weight in you that something is just off about it. Like this perfect world is just too good to be true. And as the story continues, you end up learning that is very much the case. And that, of course, brings us to Faraway Town, which is where you spend the other half of the game, and where you're introduced to the real main character of the story known as Sunny, a teenager who's locked himself away in his house after the death of his older sister Mari, and now prefers to dream of the days where everything was happier. You know, he basically lives the life of a Reddit mod. He tries to dream of happier times, but he just can't get it anymore. It's also revealed that Sunny is leaving Faraway in 3 days due to his family moving. And during those 3 days, you can either spend that time in Headspace going on wacky adventures, or you can spend it with your friends who you haven't interacted with in a long time, and hopefully rebuild the bonds you lost. These lost bonds have to do with the characters Kel, Basil, Aubrey, and Hero, people you've interacted with in Headspace, but are now meeting their real versions for the first time in a while. And honestly, this is easily one of the best parts of this game. I love how you get to see how each character has been affected by the death of Mari, alongside Sunny. Hero falls into depression, believing he wasn't good enough to help Mari, who was his girlfriend. Kel develops self-worth problems and hides it behind a cheery personality. Aubrey believes everyone chose to abandon her to her own suffering, an arc that surprisingly gets the most focus second only to Sunny. And Basil struggles with his slowly dwindling mental sanity and developing some, let's just say, not safe for YouTube tendencies. And man, do these arcs hit hard. OMORI really goes in on getting you to take a good long look at how all of these kids have just been mentally fucked up these past few years. It's raw, brutal, heavy, and most of all, beautiful. It's almost nothing like the time you spend in Headspace where everything is cutesy and squeaky clean. The character writing is honestly leagues above most RPGs I've played in recent time. If you're a fan of a well-written cast, OMORI has it in spades. With that spoken of, how about we talk about the combat? I was originally going to talk about the story more, but I would say it's best to go in as blind as possible so it hits even harder. Trust me, this game is so much better when you know as little as possible about its sad or terrifying moments. And I've already mentioned a major spoiler revolving around Mari, and I'd love for that to be the only one I have to mention. Anyway, let's move on to the combat. It's way better than I expected it to be. I had assumed before playing it that the turn-based combat was just going to be a bit bare bones, since the story was obviously going to be the main focus. But there's a shocking level of depth in it. It's your standard turn-based setup, sure, but it's enhanced by a few additions. First is the follow-up system, where after launching a normal attack, you can spend special points, which are obtained through taking damage through the enemy, to have another character act outside of their turn. which can lead to a variety of outcomes, from dealing an extra hit, to healing a character, or even getting you a stat boost. It's a cool system that rewards you for planning out your moves. You could save your points to deal out a few follow-up attacks, or you could charge them all up to max and release an insanely powerful special attack with all the party members. I kind of hope that I see more RPG Maker games copy this concept, because it was a lot of fun to use, especially in the boss fights. And second is the emotion mechanic, which to me is actually this game's most interesting concept. Unlike the normal buffs you get in OMORI, emotions function more as high risk, high reward passives when used. The emotions are sad, happy, and angry. When someone is sad, they take less damage, and some of it is drained from the juice of the character, which is basically their MP, but they also don't deal as much damage. Happy makes you faster and gives you more luck, but makes you miss more often than usual. And angry makes you deal more damage to your opponent, but you also take more damage as well. These emotions can even be stacked to make characters madder, sadder, or happier to increase their effects. If you think that's nuts, well, guess what? The enemies you face can also utilize emotions in combat as well, which helps intensify each boss battle throughout the game. Also, small detour, but I love the way character portraits change depending on what tier of emotion you have. Love little details like that. Hoping more RPGs try that. Adding on to this is that these emotions have sort of a Pokemon fire, grass, water weakness triangle to them, which adds another layer of strategy to using them. And of course, these battles are all accompanied by an absolutely fantastic soundtrack, without a single bad bop in it. My two personal favorites are the Sweetheart Boss theme and Space Boyfriend's theme, but every other track is impressive as well. I've talked quite a lot about the gameplay and other stuff, but how is the horror element of OMORI handled? Well, I think it's quite good. I don't play a lot of horror games, but one horror genre I love is psychological, and OMORI does a good job getting in your head with its horror. Split-second screens and unnerving atmosphere that do a fantastic job of chilling you to the bone or making you look over your shoulder. My personal favorite moment is actually at the very start when Sunny hears Mary's voice on the other side of the door, and you slowly open it. This unsettling dread just starts sinking into you. It just takes forever to open, and then it happens. It's absolutely incredible. It actually made me jump out of my seat the first time I saw it. And that's all for pros. Let's go get to the cons now, shall we? Now, in the whole grand scheme of things, I actually don't have a huge amount of problems with OMORI. Most of it is minor nitpicks that are overcome after about, I'd say maybe 3-4 hours of gameplay, but there is one thing that bothered me, and it's something I've wanted to talk about more than anything, and it's actually the character Kel, and how I believe OMORI kinda does him dirty. Now, in Faraway and Headspace, Kel is portrayed as the kind-hearted, caring ball of positivity that does whatever he can to be there for his friends and family. He's the sole reason Sunny decides to leave his house, and one of the biggest factors for getting the group back together. He's also, funnily enough, included in the most memes out of all of the characters. Since, you know, every Kel meme is canon, of course. And to be honest, he does all of those roles quite well. However, my issue with that part of him more so is how he's not really explored outside of that. You see, once you run into Aubrey again, Kel kinda really doesn't get much to do outside of just be the positivity guy. Out of your entire group, he gets explored the least. Hell, Hero, who shows up around the 70% point in the game, gets more of a look into how Mari dying affected him more than the guy you meet like several hours earlier. Which is honestly so weird to me, considering OMORI makes such a focus about fleshing out its honestly amazing cast, that one of the first guys you meet gets pretty much nothing. There is a moment where you get to see Kel has more to him, but it's relegated to a piece of side content. For some context, there's an extra scene you can unlock by visiting Mari's grave with just Kel, who decides to tell Sunny that after her death, Hero spiraled into a really deep depression that really worried his family. And Kel, being the nice guy that he is, tried to reach out to him in the hopes of helping the brother he loves. Unfortunately, this didn't work, as it only made Hero angry and he snapped at Kel and started yelling some pretty horrible stuff, although Kel does mention that he blocks most of it out. But it's gotta be pretty bad considering that it bothered Kel of all people, and even made him cry, which is crazy when you know the guy. Kel then mentions that afterwards his parents only comforted Hero and not him, which he basically just tries to push off as no big deal, which is pretty fucked up. It makes me wish that concept of Cal brushing his emotions off to the side in favor of others got brought up more in the story. The idea of positive characters constantly bottling up their emotions behind a carefree smile until it eventually just explodes is so interesting to me as a concept. There is a moment later on where Aubrey ended up nearly getting Basil killed, when this would have been the perfect moment for him to completely break and unleash all of his problems at Aubrey, turning into a target where all of his rage just gets thrown at. But instead he just kind of tells her to fuck off and leaves, which I'm not gonna lie, is pretty disappointing. I still like Kel a lot. I love positive rays of sunshine, but in a game with so many in-depth characters, it sucks that one of your first ever party members, who's included in pretty much every part of the sections of the game, gets barely anything outside of their main way of thinking. Spent way longer on this than I thought I would. How about we focus on the rest of the problems? First off, the Humphrey dungeon kinda sucks. One of the final levels in the game is just going inside the headspace whale Humphrey, and it is a long dungeon filled with a ton of tedious backtracking and annoying as hell puzzles. Every other level is perfectly fine, but Humphrey just feels unnecessarily long for no reason other than just to pad out the game. Other than these complaints, the only other problem I've got is the common issue of moving around in RPG Maker games feels pretty weightless, but that's just a universal problem with most of these games. Plus, that weightless feel is able to get used to in about an hour or 2 or 4 of gameplay, so I'm just going to give it a minor mention and move on to my final thoughts. Well, we're finally at the end of it all, and I gotta say, while I don't think OMORI is the scariest game in the world, I am certain it is without a doubt one of the most emotional games I've ever played. If you're interested in getting a cool RPG with a gripping story and characters, pick this game up right now. My final rating for this game is a very spooky 8.5 out of 10. And that's it. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like and subscribe for more RPG content. And thank you all so much for joining me for this. Have a wonderful Halloween, and I will see you all next time.